Hello viewers. In today's video, I'm going to talk about how to auto-update the auditable fields in the database using the entity framework. While doing the data modeling, one of the important things that we need to consider is to have some auditable fields in every table. For example, for each record in a table, we want to keep track when the record was created and who created it, or when the record has been updated and by whom. Now, one of the ways of doing that is to when you insert the record or update a record, you can make sure that you are updating those fields. Now, in this process, the issue is that you have to repeat the same code update on those same fields every time you are inserting or updating. Wouldn't it be really nice if we can automatically do that without manually doing the same thing in every place in your code base? That way we can reduce the number of code, and most importantly, we can enforce those auditable fields are not getting missed while doing the insertion or update. Let me show you an example. So I have a web API called Bookstore. And if you see, I have a bookstore controller where I have the add book endpoint and an update book. So there's a book service, it calls the add book method of the book service and the update book method for the update. If you go to the book service, the add book basically creates a book entity when adds the title, description, author, price, and publish date, and saves it. Now, if you see the book entity, it has all these five fields, and it also extends the entity base. And the entity base has ID, created date, and updated date. Now, these are the two fields that are my auditable fields, by which I want to know when a record is created, what is the date and time it was created, and if any time it has been updated, then what is the date and time of it. Now, all the tables or all the entity in my code of this bookstore would extend this entity base so that everyone has these two fields. And this entity base implements the I auditable entity, which is an interface which has these three fields. Now, if you see my method in the book service, that after I'm creating a new book entity, I'm just adding it to my books list, and finally I'm calling the save changes. Now this is the save changes method in the DB context of entity framework. So what it does, whenever you are done adding a new entity or updating a new entity and you call this save changes, it just saves the record, whatever changes that you have made. Same thing with the update book method. If I'm updating an existing entity, first I'm grabbing the entity from the table and then I'm updating each and every field. If there is a value in that field, then I'm updating that, and finally I'm calling the save changes. So let me run this and show you how it works. So I'm just going to use a Swagger to call these endpoints, and in the meantime, while it starts running, can show you what my table look like. Table has all these fields along with these two fields, created date and updated date. And if you see currently in my, I have two records, book one, and there's another empty book record, but I'm going to create a new one to show you how it works. So it's just launching the browser. Let's just wait until it's finished loading. Okay, so it has finished loading. So if you see my host endpoint with the books, so if I run this, I don't need to add the ID because it's going to be created automatically. Title, say book 3, description, book 3, description, author, book 3, author, and I have a published date, say 2010. I just don't need the time, and price say 40 bucks, 40.50. Now if I execute this, it's gonna call this add book endpoint, and once it gets finished, see I got a 200 response back. Now if I check my table, see a new record has been created. Now if we look at the record, the created date field has been updated. But in my code, in my add book method, I'm not adding the created date in this entity, but it still got updated. Now, since this is a creation, now let me update this book. So let me get the ID of this book, and I'm going to call now the patch endpoint to update this book. I just put the ID of the book that I'm going to update, say book 3 update book 3 description update book 3 author update, and say let me put a new date, so 2011, and price say $50. Now if I execute this, it's going to call the update book endpoint, and once it's finished, now if I go and check my table, see it has all the update that I made. But most importantly, the updated field has been added. So now how it's working, even though I'm not adding the updated field anywhere here, still it's getting updated. Now let me show you. So this save changes, as I said, this is a method from the entity framework DB context, and my bookstore DB context is extending the DB context. Now I can override that save changes method. So this is where my, like, those updating of those auditable entries will go. So while I'm overriding this method, you see what I'm getting the detecting the changes and this change tracker entries. So I'm going through all the entries where the state of the entry is add or modified. So what it's doing is going through whenever I'm calling save changes, since I have an override of save changes, it's going to call this overridden method first instead of the base method. So, and there it's going through all the entries and finding out that which of the entry has a state of add or modified. Now, once I find that, I'm going through all the entries, and if the state is add, then I'm updating the create date. If the state is modified, I'm updating the updated date. And then I'm calling the base save changes. So end of this code, finally the base save changes method is called. So before that, I'm just updating all the entries to make sure the created date and updated date has been updated. So this is how, whenever we call the save changes or we are inserting a record or updating a record, it's going to the entries and just automatically updating those auditable fields. So that's how this can be done. Now, this can be used for many other purposes. This is just an example with two dates, but say if you also want to update like who made these changes, then you can also do that here too. So for example, if your endpoint is an authenticated endpoint. So everyone, whoever calls the endpoint has to be authenticated. And once the user gets authenticated, you can create a user context which can be persisted throughout the app. And then here, when you come here, you just get the user context and get the username, and you can just update the username who made the update or created this entry. Now, you can also increment or change the ID or set the primary key here or any other logic that you want to be implemented with and that is applicable for all the tables. It can be done here before you make the save or before you're saving the changes. So this is a very powerful place, I would say, where you can do a lot of things. And this is just an example to show you how we can automate this saving of these auditable fields. So I hope this video will help you. If you have any question, you can leave a comment. Thanks for watching.